Hello, everyone. Welcome to our little lunchtime session here. My name is Fen, and I am the manager of crisis services for the Canadian Mental Health Association. And I'm really excited to be able to host our talk here today about the 2S LGBTQIA+ community and mental health. We're very, very lucky to have joining us Glynnis, who is the executive director for the Institute of Sexual Minority Studies at the U of A, and also Cheyenne, who's with the incredible Edmonton Two-Spirit Society. We may have Corey joining us at some point, who is with the Chew Project, which is one of the 2S LGBTQIA+ youth shelters here in the city. So we'll see if he's able to join us. I know Zoom technology is just always a headache. So what we'll do is we'll kind of go through each of our panelists. Will have kind of like a little chance to share a little bit about either their personal or professional scope on this area. And then we'll be able to kind of open up into a more general Q&A. If there are questions that are coming up though, feel free to throw them in the chat and we can maybe type out some replies, or we can always kind of bring them up once we're ready to open things up a little bit more. So without further ado, why don't we jump over to Cheyenne? Would you like to start us off?
Sure. So Tansi Kakiano Magamanak, hello all my relatives. Cheyenne Mihko Kihêw and Tsigatsan. My name is Cheyenne. I'm from Edmonton here in Treaty 6 territory. However, my family is from Driftpal Cree Nation, which is in northern Alberta in Treaty 8. On my mother's side, I don't know my biological father. So there's like a whole half of my identity that I don't have the ability to take claim to. I am a very proud Two-Spirit person. I identify as Kihêw, or that's one of our 8 genders within the Cree teachings around each of their own gender roles and stuff. And so Kihêw is neither man or woman, but kind of all the genders in one. That's kind of how I see myself, or part of the Testi Winawak, which is the in-between people. Fun fact, we have a ward in Edmonton named after the Testi Winawak. So if you live in that ward, you are already honoring Two-Spirit people, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so I am the community liaison for the Edmonton Two-Spirit Society. I've been with the organization now for 1 year, just over a year. And it's been a really wonderful experience, just getting to know more of our Two-Spirit community in Edmonton, getting to be more immersed in culture and ceremony, and have like really awesome dialogue around mental health and ceremony and how culture can be really a good pathway to positive mental health outcomes. I will say right now, I just found out I have COVID today, so if I'm a little like, well, that's why. I'm just coming back off vacation and I caught COVID while I was on vacation. So yeah, do I talk more? What do I say? What else do you want me to say?
Did you want to maybe share any thoughts, whether it is kind of like in relation to the society that you work with, in terms of like, maybe what are some of the things that you see in terms of like mental health and those intersections with the queer community?
Yeah, so E2S is a really small organization. There's only, at this time, we only have 2 staff, myself and the executive director. But one of our big things that we are really hoping to be able to support community with is mental health support. So myself, I'm trained in mental health first aid, suicide intervention, crisis intervention. And so I'm readily available for folks to come to ask questions, to have conversations on more of a peer support level, because I'm not a trained psychologist or anything like that. So I can just like basically provide peer support. But I can also provide referrals to folks if they're hoping to actually get connected with a psychologist. We work with Oshrak Counseling, as well as Indigenous Counseling Services and a couple of other ones. So we are able to provide referrals to folks, especially if they don't have coverage. So if you have First Nations coverage, like treaty benefits, NIHB, you are able to access a certain amount of sessions for free a year. And that number can change if you have anyone in your family or you yourself have been involved in the residential school system. system. So there's opportunities for mental health support through our organization. We've just been in a transitional period over the last few months, trying to find our footing, and just we need a home. We don't have an office at the moment, so it's a little hard for us to do in-person peer support at the moment. But ideally, what we would love to do is see more of a hub set up for Indigenous folks who are queer and questioning, and their families and supporters, to be able to access everything they need all in one space. So, you know, you come in, you can smudge, you can do ceremony, you can sit with an elder, but then you can also like do wraparound services. So do you need housing? Do you need support with food security? Do you need support with your mental health? And how can we support that? So we have a lot of big ideas. We're just very limited on staff resources at the time. So it's hard for us to do a lot of that stuff, but you know, having connection to culture is a really big part of ensuring that your mental health is being supported in a good way. And so we really want to make sure that folks have access to those elders and the supports that they need in community, because you know, it's hard out there for a lot of us right now. We lost 2 of our community members last year due to suicide. So you know, mental health is a really important conversation for us to be having, but especially it's an integral conversation to have when we're talking about reconnecting to our gender roles, reconnecting to Indigenous communities, and how are we doing that in a way that's honoring Two-Spirit knowledge and wisdom, but also like recognizing all the other stuff that we bring to the table. So that's a little bit about us and kind of what we do. I would say that we're like not at a good position right now as where I'd love to be doing all the programs and services and events, but it's hard with only 2 people and a limited budget. So we're hoping that we can have more availability, more opportunities for folks to come sit with us and be in ceremony with us and talk about the tough stuff, because it's important. Hey.
And I think there is a lot more growing recognition, right, in terms of how much access to ceremony, access to language, access to culture is directly the work of suicide prevention.
Absolutely, it is. Like something as simple as even being able to receive your ceremonial name, right? Like something that connects you to your ancestors, connects you to your cultural journey. Like for me, Mihko Kihêw is actually part of my ceremonial name. So because I had like just some guys, my mom's like ex-husband, who's not my biological dad, I carried his name for many years. And it was like a source of like unrest for me. Like it was impacting me in ways that I didn't really realize until after I changed my name legally. It was like, oh, wow, this actually feels really good. And I feel more set in my identity, and I feel more confident in who I am as a person, and getting that name was like a big part of that journey for me. And even like being able to get your face tattoos or your traditional tattoos, right? Like being able to ask questions about those tattoos, like that's suicide prevention. And you wouldn't think of it in that way, but it's like that process of cultural reclamation. It's really important right now.
Thank you so much. Why don't we jump over to Glynnis then? Would you like to maybe share a little bit about kind of some of the work that you're engaged in and some of your perspectives on this?
Absolutely. So hello, everybody. Glynnis, Lieb, she, her pronouns. And I am honored and privileged to live, work, and play in Amaskochi, West Kihêw, on Treaty 6 territory. I'm originally from Newfoundland, which is home to many Indigenous peoples, including Beothuk and Mi'kmaq. And because, of course, Newfoundland joined the Confederacy late, they didn't sign treaties there. So I have the privilege of living in both places. And I'm happy to be here representing the Institute for Sexual Minority Studies and Services today, soon to be changing our name. I'm also happy about that. Which is great. We did a lot of work, and we should be announcing that within the next month, just to bring our language up to date a little bit. And that too. And I'm also honored to be here with Cheyenne, who is brilliant and phenomenal and doing tremendous work in the community. So thank you. I am a social psychologist by training, and I'm listening to what Cheyenne's talking about, and I'm thinking of this mantra from this wonderful person who guided me through my studies, is that all humans are motivated by the need to feel like they can make sense of things, and that they belong someplace, right? And I see that so much in the work that we do. And that day to day, I accidentally fell face first into social activism with the 2S LGBTQ community in Winnipeg when I was in university, and had found my way into the community and found my home there, and that's, and I've continued that as I've moved west. And so the work that we do at the Institute, we do, again, a lot of it is around, we're providing mental health services. We provide access to free psychological services for folks who are members of their community and their families. We provide a ton of education and awareness building intended to help promote advocacy, self-advocacy, self-empowerment, and so forth. And that goes from our Camp Firefly leadership development camps to our Firefly in Schools work that we do, to the GSAs that we help build and create, and that as well. And this was all came out of the idea that 2S LGBTQ kids needed someone somewhere to show them not only that they mattered, but how to gain their footing, and how to how valuable they were in community, and how to find their place, and how to make themselves heard and take up the space that they deserve in the broader community. And so that started with Camp Firefly and has expanded into the other programs that that we offer now. The Chew Project, which Ben mentioned, which Corey, when not in crisis, with somebody who's experiencing crisis, can join us, is one of our programs as well. And this, like many of the other programs, it was built by the community telling us what their needs are. And it started out as this, little tiny hole in the wall downtown, in which which people would show up, and we'd provide emergency supplies and do STBBI testing and things like that. And it grew into a day shelter that it is now. And we have approximately 170 regular service users now, and then a couple of hundred pop-ins, and that's without broad advertising, and that is focusing on people who identify as members of the 2S LGBTQ community, who are under 30 years of age. And the youngest folks that we have right now as regulars are 8 and 9 years of age. And so, right, and that is, that leads me to talk about the importance of having this conversation about mental health in general, mental health and wellness, but within our community, because many progressive minded folks in the world honestly kind of think we're at a place where, quote unquote, it's okay to be gay. And for many people it is, but for so many members, we're not there yet. We're not there socially yet, and people's families aren't there yet. And and we see this day in, day out. We see, I talk about 8 and 9-year-olds. We see, we, like, Corey found an 8-year-old child trying to make a bed behind a dumpster last year because their family had kicked them out of their house because they believed at 8 years old their child was queer. And that's not the only one, right? And so we're still at this place where this happens, in a place where we think it's very safe. And that's, and that's where work, like the work that E2S and Cheyenne and others are doing, is so important too, because there's much more to unravel in this conversation about wellness. We are one of the highest risk communities for suicide still, for a reason, because the many gains, and, coming out of the mental health world, so many folks were like, we have to make the inroads with stigma reduction around mental illness and addiction the way the 2S LGBTQ community has made inroads around stigma reduction in the last few decades. And yes, our community has made huge inroads for some. And that's where we're at. A lot of the progress that's been made in the last 30, 40 years has been enjoyed by certain members of our community, and others have been left behind. And that's, and these are some really important conversations that I think some very brave folks stood up, took a lot of backlash for, and brought our attention to back in 2018, 2019, and looking at the inequity within our community, the racism within our community, the transphobia within our community and outside. And that, and so this is still where we're at. We're working with all these youth, just like E2S is supporting folks in that too, who are still being excluded from their communities, and that because of their gender identity, their sexuality, and so forth. And we see this all the time. And the bitter reality that we're working with is the fact that that a lot of this the messaging that we are fighting and get, if we're not careful, get trapped in the idea of ourselves as being more aware, and that than some. But a lot of this is ideology that that I say as a person of Western European descent, that we pushed, right? Western Christianity pushed this idea of, the gender binary, you're male or female and nothing else, pushed the idea of heterosexuality being the only acceptable way. And now we're sending this message to many folks that whom we serve, including Indigenous folks, who were taught this by our ancestors, and now we're bringing new information as if it's information that we have for the first time. And so that's we see that a lot, and we see the implications. And so we at our shelter alone, we average about 15 active suicide interventions per week. That's active suicide intervention. That's not suicide ideation, and that too. So we have a high rate still of depression, anxiety, self-harm, suicide within our community. And the tendency in the medical world is to pathologize gender and sexual diversity, and say that people who are gender diverse have more mental health problems, or people who are sexually diverse. And it's not that. It's not that at all. It's the stigma, the rejection, the isolation, and that leads to emotional suffering and mental health problems, and that too. And so we have to really be clear about that messaging, and that's still what we're working with, and that too. And I do a lot of work in workplaces as well. Historically, I come out of organized labor too, and do a lot of mental health in the workplace. And what we find in workplaces, still lots of workplaces believe that they're very safe places for members of the 2S LGBTQ community. But often what we find is they haven't thought past the gay heterosexual male, that's kind of, and when you have folks who don't use she or he pronouns, folks who, who are, not white, etc., there tends to be challenges still. And we still find just the simple stress of having to, out yourself at work over and over and over again, even if there's never a negative reaction, has huge repercussions, because we're not at a place yet where your sexuality or gender differences are as normal as eye color differences, right? Which is where we hope to get to. So we have a lot of work to do still, and that's why we're all here. And so happy to chat about anything you want to, and answer any questions.
Yeah, I think I can build on that whole idea that the lack of connection and within our own communities is really what we're working up against in the Two-Spirit community. We are very well accepted by our rainbow family. There's no question about that. Two-Spirit people, more and more we see the acronym being moved to the front, and people understanding why we do that, and having broader conversations than, Two-Spirit is the male and female energies. And it's we're starting to see more conversation around the nuances of what it is to be Two-Spirit. But where those conversations aren't really quite there yet is in Indigenous spaces. And that's where we really need to be having those conversations, right? Because you've got young kids who are going to ceremony and are being forced to wear a skirt, or if they're a trans male and they're menstruating now, can they go to that ceremony even though they're not a woman? Or what are the teachings around menstruation, and how do we have conversations with our elders around these teachings, right? And picking apart what teachings come from colonization, like you were saying, Glynnis, a lot of this isn't from us. This comes from Christianity. It comes from really deep rooted fears of just difference, which is so silly. but like knowing that our Indigenous spaces need the most healing, I think is like probably one of my like favorite parts of my work, but also part like some of my most challenging parts of my work, you know. And even for myself to go to ceremony, it's difficult sometimes. Of like, we were at a ceremony recently with our work, and there was like a couple adjacent lodges on the same site, and one of the other groups that were doing a ceremony next to us, one of the elders like looked over at us and yelled like, "Looks like you got the whites over there and we got the natives over here," and then big laughter. And like all of those people laughed. Like nobody came over and apologized. The little kids were making fun of us as they were running around. And that wasn't Two-Spirit specific, but like when you have a Two-Spirit lodge happening and your biggest concern is, are we going to get kicked out for being Two-Spirit? And all of a sudden now we're two white passing, like that's what you're bringing to us, you know, like people aren't going to access ceremony anymore if they're going to feel like by elders specifically that they're not welcome, right? So, and I carry the like slightly maybe controversial opinion that our elders need the most healing and the most love, because they went through those processes more intimately, and because they are like, they have the most healing to do, and that healing is passed down to us as well. Like that pain, that grief, we're born with it, right? But it doesn't have to be that way. And so these conversations within Indigenous space are really important, because we don't need 8 and 9-year-olds being kicked off the reserve even and then being sent to the city. You know, it's yeah, I'll stop there.
No, and that's important, because what we see, and you know, we keep seeing this because we provide early kind of preventative and early intervention services. So we have our, you know, our Firefly in schools, which, you know, in our GSA network work, you know, setting up Great Straight Alliances and that, which is intended to be, you know, inclusive to and we've focused on schools intentionally for the 16 years we've been around, because that's where youth spend most of their time outside of their home, and the teachers and staff and that there have, you know, could play a huge role in you know, in impacting the experiences in childhood that people have, particularly if their experiences at home aren't great. Teachers make or break that, right? And so we've spent a lot of time there. So, but we also, and then we have mental health services directed at people who, you know, are trying to understand their journey with sexuality or gender. And we purposely bring in family and loved ones to that to help them understand it together and work through it together, again, as a way of, you know, preventing or repairing any kind of breakdown that might happen. But then we have the Chew Project on the other side, and you know, and what we see when we have the, you know, the preventative or the early intervention is we have certain demographics of folks that we see there, and then we have certain demographics of folks that we see coming into the other side when you know, in crisis management, and in, you know, folks who are experiencing precarious housing or being unhoused or being, you know, involved in survival sex work and that too. And, you know, and there are real differences there that tell us that, you know, the folks who are still being so negatively impacted by this, this stigma and the misinformation around sexuality and gender, you know, are not the folks who look like me and not the folks with my background, you know, and that too. And so, and we have so many people who turn up in this city, again, coming from other communities, and that because they think that things will be better here, but better in a big city, better, you know, when people don't know them, you know, all those things. And they end up in the, you know, in the big mean city, and, you know, and they're vulnerable, right? So, you know, you know, it's really humbling to know just how much work we still have to do, and it's not, you know, we work in the schools, and you know, I'll tell you that the kids are okay. The kids, you know, the kids get it, you know, and that it's the adults we have to, you know, that we have to bring along for sure.
Yeah, and when the kids don't get it, it's generally because the adults in their lives are like pretty aggressive with their beliefs, right? So it's not even the fault of the children who carry that stigma and perpetuate it in the schools, right? There's a really interesting statistic from Egal Canada from their most recent survey that they did nationwide, and the group that received like the most harassment or whatever in schools was Indigenous kiddos who are also queer or trans identifying, and they experience like 75% more harassment than their Indigenous cis straight counterparts, which is like a drastic difference there, right? Like that hurts my heart, knowing that there's little kiddos in school who are just like trying to live their best lives, and unfortunately, because they're brown and gay, it's a whole problem.
Yeah, exactly. And we're still there. And, and somebody said that to me not too long ago. And that's so, they said, I like, I can be brown or I can be gay. I can't be both, and unfortunately that's where we still are. Right. And that people, again, general society will kind of maybe give on one of those fronts, but when but not multiple. Right. And that too. And you touched on something else very important there too. And this applies, whether schools or workplace, and that too. One of the things that we see consistently in research, because we're a research-based organization too, so we're bound by, we provide program based on best practices, and we have to produce research as well. But one of the things we see consistently in research is that schools that have active GSAs or QSAs actually experience lower rates of bullying, discrimination across the board, across gender, race, everything. And the interesting thing is, one of the groups that shows to have the best mental health outcomes of being in schools that have GSAs are cisgender heterosexual males. So not members of the queer community at all, because again, it's the addressing that, it's that toxic masculinity, right? And when you have a place that's very welcoming of, different ways of interacting, of seeing the world, and that too, it helps alleviate some of that toxic masculinity that, impacts, again, which is why males in Alberta are one of the other high risk groups for suicide and self-harm, right? We still have a culture here that's, again, that's puts a lot of pressure on men in this province.
Looking at the time, maybe we can open it up now and see if there are any questions from any of the participants. You're welcome to either type stuff into the chat, or if you want to just unmute and speak, you are more than welcome to as well. If not, I'm sure we can keep having some wonderful conversation.
I think while we're waiting for a question too, when we're talking about workplace too, and I think, and I'm sure a lot of the folks, given where you come from, work-wise here, are probably well aware of this. But one of the things that we see is that some of the things that you can do to make the biggest change culturally in your workplace are little things like asking pronouns, using pronouns. It seems like a little thing, and people find it uncomfortable sometimes, but what that act in itself has been shown to have a tremendous impact on making members of our community actually feel like that workplace is an accepting, understanding, safe, positive environment to work in. Just those simple little things like that. Having just having those bits of information make all the difference. And so having the rainbow sticker is not enough anymore. And we've been doing the safer spaces training for a long time, and it's no longer a simple questionnaire where you say, yay, yeah, we're and you get a sticker. You actually have to work for it now. It takes commitment, and that so and that too. So
I think what you're talking about there too, Glynnis, is that while there's the buzzword of diversity, right, which I'm sure we can say in a lot of the areas that we exist within, there is a desire to see that diversity, but that diversity cannot exist if you are not creating space for those people to exist within. And I think that's where things like access to ceremony, normalizing the sharing of pronouns, and not doing it in like intrusive ways where we're asking people for pronouns, but normalizing just that it's okay to share what our pronouns are in spaces, so that, for example, when I'm sharing that I use they, them pronouns, I'm not the only person in that meeting having to share that and feeling very othered in that moment. Cheyenne, sorry, I interrupted. You were about to say something.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to say too, like another really good thing to be mindful of when you're thinking of like organizational practices is referrals. I think that's something we don't really talk about enough, is blind referrals. So just like sending people to the I'm not going to say the name, sending people to a certain organization that might not be safe for racialized folks, right? Like there's conversations that are larger happening in the community. And so you got a young Black kid, like where do you send them, right? And do you know where you're sending them? So with referrals, I think it's like my biggest recommendation is call ahead, know who you're talking to on the phone, know what services they provide, do like a little environmental scan of what they have happening in their organization with their policies and their practices, because you don't want to send a kid somewhere where it's already hard enough for a kid to follow through. You kind of need to support kiddos sometimes to making the call and like not doing it for them, but like, just empowering them to be able to learn how to make that call, because sometimes that can be hard too. But you want to make sure that whoever's on the other end is going to be safer, because safe is hard to judge, but like a bit more of a positive interaction for them.
And that's where, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ben.
You can go.
No, I was going to say that's really important. That's actually, so the Bright line, the crisis support line that we partnered with CMHA to create was specifically about that, because for years, again, this seems like a small thing, but when you're in crisis, it's huge. When when you have no mental resources left to deal with anything unpleasant, the idea that that you're going to call somebody you don't know, and not knowing how they'll react if you tell them your pronouns, or if you tell them that your partner is the same gender as you, for some folks that's too insurmountable in the moment to call for help, because they just don't have the capacity to have to explain that or have to deal with a negative reaction. And so we created Brightline, which is dedicated to the 2S LGBTQ community, a crisis support line. And so you're not going to get somebody who misgenders you after you've told them, or uses the name that happens to be in your health records, even though you've told them that's not your name, those kinds of things, right? So, and that's really important. Even again, going back to the workplace, the simple act of, and when you're talking to people, talking about saying like my partner, or that sort of thing, or rather than say, or is your partner coming, rather than saying is your husband coming, and making those kinds of assumptions, makes a big difference for folks too, because then they don't feel like they have to either out themselves or lie, or those kinds of things. So using conversation, and we've done a lot of work about looking through company policies and procedures and that too, and just checking where we can have inclusive language in a way that makes folks feel like things apply to them, right? And so those are little things that we can do that make us a whole lot more welcoming in the workplace.
Maybe let's give it a second and see if anyone wanted to jump in with anything.
And the other thing I'll say during this dead space is that the one thing that, if one of the main silver linings that's come out of COVID is the fact that right now COVID gives everybody an out to say how they're really doing, to say if they're struggling. And we're seeing, because again, it's a shared thing that we're all in it together. And I can say that actually I'm feeling pretty crappy today. And I don't have to, I don't have to explain it. I don't have to, because everybody's in it together. So it's given people an out to talk about how they're really doing. And I think we need to jump on that. I think we need to jump on that opportunity to have honest conversations with folks around us, to get to know our workplace. One of the biggest things that I've done a whole bunch of this, and people always ask about, I don't know what to say, or how do I help somebody if I think they're struggling at work? The biggest thing you can do is get to know your coworkers in advance, so you actually have a relationship with them already, but also so you notice if something about them changes. And that too, these are the biggest things we do: build relationship, build community. It's good for us, it's good for the people around us.
I mean, that also applies to like any youth or any community member that you might be working with. Like in my experience working with the unhoused community, like they're not just going to sit down and tell you their life story. Like they're not going to, and if they do dump on you, there's like an instant regret or shame that follows it. And so then they have to process, oh my God, I just told this person I don't even know all this stuff about myself. One of my favorite practices would be just laying out some like coloring sheets and just allowing folks to just color. And the amount of conversations I've had with people and the relationships I began to develop by just sitting and coloring with them. Like I've got like RA members talking about their experiences in the gang and how they actually would like to get out of the gang, but they're kind of stuck in it, you know, and like I'm sitting with him and he's just coloring like a picture of Winnie the Pooh or something, you know, like you get them in a moment of just almost like normalcy when their life is in chaos. I think it's really important as well. So relationship building is such a big key thing for mental health support. It's like just ensuring that you, so the person knows, like, so when you ask, like, are you okay? They're able to say, no, you know, I'm really not.
Exactly. And this is, again, and so for those of you, anyone in the room who has taken any kind of psychology training, you probably all know Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so many of you may also know that Maslow stole that idea from the Blackfoot right here in Alberta. And that too, and if you look and inverted it to, you know, make it more, you know, again, Western individualistic, right? You know, the model they stole it from originally, again, he talks about this idea that it's your survival needs and then your personal development and then kind of the community, right? And the original was inverted. It's community first, right? And that's the thing. It's, you know, it's that thinking about, you know, community, where you belong, where you fit, who you're accountable to, and that contributing back. And through that, you build yourself and your needs get met, you know, through that. And that's what we're trying to do with the work that we do too, and particularly in CHU. It's not about bringing folks in and going, you know, okay, you know, you need to deal with your financial issues and your substance use, and this and this and this. We bring them in, we get to know them, we bring them into the family, we find their role, and it is a family that we create. And Corey always talks about the idea that what we're doing is we're working to give people hope, we're building hope, and we're building family. And we bring them into the family, find their role, find the trust, as Cheyenne was saying, the accountability to others, the purpose for, you know, and then you find your way to, you know, to meeting other needs and addressing other things. And that's, you know, and I think that, you know, and that's another thing I want to take out of COVID, and I hope we all take away, is that relationships, having community around us in the true sense of the word, there's nothing that matters more than that. And statistically, we know that the biggest predictor of maintaining wellness or regaining it is the quality of your social networks and social supports. And so, you know, get to know folks, build them. We don't have to have any magical insights into anything, just have to take an active interest in people, you know.
Maybe to start kind of working towards an ending, then I thought we might end on maybe a little more hopeful note after, you know, talking about suicide and all of the forms of oppression that we as queer people face. And I have been really thinking a lot lately about a quote that I had read by a really Black feminist thinker who's queer named Bell Hooks, who recently, unfortunately, is no longer with us. And in an interview, she had said that queer is not about who you're having sex with, although that can certainly be a part of it. But queer is being about the self that is at odds with everything around it, and has to invent and create and find a place to speak and to thrive and to live. And I think, especially as I get a little older and maybe a little more distance between some of my, you know, childhood trauma growing up queer, I think I'm always struck, speaking to like the connections that I've been able to form in my adult life with other queer people, is just like the creativity and like abundance of our community, that we encounter, you know, so many barriers in every, you know, level of life. And that only becomes, you know, increased even more, you know, when you add those intersections of being Black, of being, you know, Indigenous on top of it. But the ways that we are able to push past that and to have just this fecundity and abundance of, you know, the ways that we are able to create meaningful lives for ourselves, and in ways that don't always fit within, you know, a nice little neat box, like, you know, a large amount of the heteronormative world seems to exist within, but that we're able to create lives for ourselves that can be authentic and can be affirming in the ways that we need it to be, not what is affirming or right for someone else. So thank you so much, Glynnis and Cheyenne. I have enjoyed this so much, getting to hear from both of you. And I really appreciate, you know, you being able to take some time out of your, you know, well-deserved lunch breaks to join us for this and share some of your wisdom and thoughts with us. So if there are, maybe we'll open up again if there are any last questions from anyone, but otherwise—
Looks like there's a couple in the Q&A one.
Oh, am I yep, there are some notifications and I'm just not looking at it. So the first one that we had gotten is just whether we have any tips on establishing a safe space. So I know we already touched on normalizing pronouns. I think can be a really great step to do that. Anything else that you might add to that, either of you?
Yeah, I would say one of the biggest things is like, I would say like, if you're just trying to fill a checklist, if you're just like trying to check off some boxes and be like, I'm safe, you're probably not doing it right. There's like performativeness, and then there's like real work and real action, real concrete things, like really assessing like your policies and your practices. What kind of languages do your forms use? Do you enforce language within your workplace? If you're like in a school or in an organization where you have like kiddos, how are you working within bullying policies and like kindness policies, right? Like there's all these larger things that need to happen, but I think I don't really like the word safe place because it's a very subjective idea of what's safe to me. It might be different for, you know, Glynnis or Fen, right? Like, so we need to just maybe even check in with the people that are accessing your services. What do your community need, right? Like really that's the best thing. And a zero tolerance for violence, a zero tolerance for any violence. That's not just physical, that's like emotional, verbal, lateral. Like we don't have place for that. And especially within lateral like spaces, we just can't tolerate it anymore. We can't. We need to ensure that everybody accessing that space has, you know, the equitable approach that they need, right? Because not everybody has all the same needs. So I think that's my biggest thing.
Maybe,
I think that's wonderful.
just because we are almost at the end, I'll maybe jump into the second question, Glynnis. Maybe you can share some thoughts there. So the next one was just asking, how do we ensure that our positive and open-minded mindset in Canada is not overshadowed by the negative news coming out of the US? Like, you know, with what's going on with a lot of like trans restrictions there, don't say gay bills. And I mean, my first reaction to this is, I mean, I think sometimes we like to think of ourselves as, you know, Canadians as being very positive and open-minded, but those same, you know, maybe it's not always like as blatant of rhetoric as what we see in the States, but I don't think Canada is any better or different. Glynnis, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, we're not as different as we think, and I'm a political geek, and that's so I say that you know, there are things that do matter, and you know, we speak with our votes, and so the first thing, I mean, we are very influenced by the United States, meaning that what happens there influences politically what happens in Canada, as you've seen, and that too. But we need to be pushing through for, you know, for healthcare that includes, you know, interventions that are needed and necessary, affirming interventions for gender diverse folk, for queer folks. We need to, we need to be pushing for the, you know, again, and we have now made headway with the conversion therapy ban nationally and making it a criminal offense. But we have to, you know, we have to push for, there's all kinds of ways that conversion therapy happens, and we have to keep, you know, we have to keep on top of these things as well. We have to, you know, when we see things happen, we can't let it pass. We're looking at, you know, I say this, we're looking at things being said and done within our government right now, that if we let them go, it's, you know, it's a slide. And what we're seeing in the US right now, you know, even with Roe versus Wade and the anti-abortion, you know, we see how easily we can lose the gains that we've made, right? And there is I will tell you, because we live it, there is a very strong anti-queer movement in Alberta. There's organizations that are dedicated to this, dedicated to pushing back, and removing the gains that we've made legally and that within this province. And that too, it's there, that sentiment is there, and we are emboldened by the US. So we need to never assume that the same things can't happen here, and be very astute and fight. You know, when people challenge our GSA legislation, stand up and fight, you know, and that when, you know, and that when there's, you know, when we have politicians, you know, saying things that are transphobic, and that stand up and say something about it, we do have to show that it's not acceptable here, because it is very easy to take this slide, because, and I'll end on this, but I'll say that human beings are naturally made, you know, uncomfortable by change, and learning is uncomfortable. It should be. But I heard it's actually Naomi Klein who talked about toxic nostalgia. And we're in a place where social change has happened so much so fast that this rise in populism has been driven by this toxic nostalgia for the people who had comfort in power before, to really long for the days when everything made sense and things were comfortable, which meant they had the power. And this gives an opportunity to pull back and to go back to when things made sense, and that means a loss in rights for equity fighting groups. And so we have to be vigilant, and we have to be very, very involved in community and in politics, and make our voices heard.
And I mean, I really don't think Canada becomes kind of that safe, inclusive place until we start seeing more Indigenous and Two-Spirit representation in our government bodies.
Oh yeah.
Because until voices are at the table, meaningful change
Blake.
just point blank will not happen.
Absolutely.
That's why I'm so grateful that Blake is there, because it's the start of really what we needed was
Right.
our people in power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and nobody gives power to anybody else, even if they say they will. So this idea, if the queer community, if Indigenous persons, if other, non-white persons, to have true power needs to you need to have critical mass in decision-making places, right? And sometimes, again, that means for us, stepping back and and letting other folks have their voices heard, right? So
well, thank you so much. I feel like I could just spend the rest of the afternoon chatting with the two of you, but we'll finish things off here. So again, thank you so much for being able to join us, and thanks for everyone for being able to attend. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend ahead of you and have some things to kind of reflect and introspect on following this.